Before I start, I'm using quick favorites instead of keyboard shortcuts for much of this tutorial so you can see menu names to search. For example, I use the armature and mesh options from the visibility menu a lot, so I've added them to my favorites. The keyboard shortcut Q brings up the quick favorites menu. I try to minimize use of all but the most common keyboard shortcuts. This is not a full pro skinning job. It's just a bare minimum to introduce techniques and tools that are currently uncommon in other Blender tutorials. This is my Holden character. He has a standard Blender Metarig, which I've already lined up with the mesh. It is set to stick display to focus on the mesh. I'll add and undo a stock Metarig so you can see what I started with. I'm using Metarig bone naming conventions. That means using shoulder to refer to the collar or clavicle bone, and upper arm to refer to the humerus. His body and clothes are in separate meshes. It really helps with the skinning process if there's a full body mesh with no overlapping faces under clothes, because overlapping faces don't work well with auto skinning, which will be demonstrated. I'm hiding the clothes because we're going to focus on skinning techniques with the body mesh first. I'm starting with the simpler Metarig, then I'll get to Rigify. The first step is to get some keyframes on the armature. I'm auto skinning the mesh temporarily to visualize the keyframe poses. I select the mesh, then add the armature to the selection by using shift and left mouse, then parent. I get a bunch of menu options, and this time I'm selecting armature deform, and then with automatic weights below it. Set to stick display to focus on the mesh. In this case, the auto skinning is pretty good because the character is slim. I'm only going to use a few poses on the shoulders, upper arms, and legs to cover large concepts, but on a pro job, you would set test poses down to the fingers. I have the arms at the side, T-pose, and shoulders and arms almost touching the head. The T-pose should have the shoulder bones parallel to the ground plane and not in the relaxed position they'll be modeled in most of the time in an A pose. It's a common misconception that you can get a T-pose from an A pose just by rotating the upper arms parallel to the ground. That's not how our bodies work, and it's really painful when you try it. So I line up the arms with the shoulder bone first in this case, set a keyframe on both, and then rotate the shoulder bone to complete the T-pose on the next frame. Next, I rotate the shoulders up closer to the head and rotate the upper arms slightly, even though that's not entirely realistic. At frame 16, I'm selecting all of the bones in the armature and clearing all. This sets a keyframe to return to the rest pose. I'm going back to frame 10 to start work on the hips and crotch area. I've turned X mirror off so that only the left leg is being rotated. This allows us to see the skinning issues in the crotch better. I've rotated the leg forward, which is typical for walking and most leg actions. Then on frame 15, I've rotated the leg sideways in an unnatural pose to create an extreme that helps us tune the hip vertex weighting. Last, I do a head rotate to the side and rotate down pose. I'm hiding the armature so that we can see how the poses affect the mesh. At first glance, the skinning looks pretty good, but it has a number of issues that we'll want to correct. One of the things that happened when I used auto skinning is that the face is attached to the face bones. A fair amount of the time we don't want that. For example, if blend shapes are used for facial poses. Many people just delete the face bones, but the Metarig face bones generate controls that can be used for blend shapes. If we look at the vertex groups, there are a lot of face bones. How do I keep the face bones but not have them used for skinning? We'll try a wrong way first. The first thing I do is select the jawbone and assign it to the torso in the bones collection menu. Then I remove it from the face collection it's in. I'm going to use the jawbone as a helper bone for automatic skinning, even though I'm not going to use it for animation. Otherwise it might twist as if it's part of the neck. So I'm treating the jaw as part of the torso and hiding and disregarding the rest of the face bones by hiding them. Next, I want to remove all skinning information from the mesh and delete the armature modifier. The two ways to delete the armature modifier is by using unparent or Alt-P and selecting the clear option. I could also just hit the X on the armature modifier in the modifier panel. I check the vertex weights and they're empty. So with the face bones hidden, I'll parent the skin to the armature using the armature deform with automatic weights again. What? It still has vertex weights from the face bones. So I'll unparent the armature, and this time I'm using the delete all groups in the quick favorites rather than the down arrow on the vertex groups list. Because I'm going to be deleting the vertex groups repeatedly, I'm going to parent the mesh to the armature, creating a new armature modifier using Control P again. This time I'm selecting the armature deform option only. I select the skin and you can see that the vertex groups are empty. And I'm going to use a different technique for auto skinning that allows me to select only the bones I want the mesh to be weighted to. I select the armature first, then add the mesh to the selection with the Shift Select. I go into the Mode selector and choose Weight Paint, which has a lot of vertex weighting tools. In the upper left of the 3D view, there's a Face Vertex and Bone Selection option. The keyboard shortcuts for those are 1, 2, and 3 on the upper keyboard row. This can be confusing because number pad 1 is front view. Fortunately, that is displayed as numpad 1. Since it's already in the Bone Selection mode, I'll select all of the visible bones using the A key. Then I select the Weights menu and assign Automatic from Bones. I've shown you where it is in the menus, but I'm going to be using it from the quick favorites. Notice that the vertex groups are now populated. Also note that the Facebone vertex groups are not added. But there's a problem. Despite not being added, the influence from the face bones as deformers is still present, and those face bones are preventing the spine 6 and head bone as well as the jawbone from using their heat maps on the face. Let's fix it, shall we? I'll select the armature and solo the face bones. Now I'll go to the Bone Properties tab. I'll select all the bones and turn off the deform option. But that didn't turn off deform for all of the selected bones. So I select the bone with the deform setting turned off, then I select all of the face bones. I click the right mouse button while hovering over the unchecked deform button and select the Copy to Selected menu option. If you haven't used the right-click Copy to Selected before, it works on every menu option including transforms. And now none of the face bones are deformers. So you may ask, why not delete the face bones and be done with them altogether? And the answer is because we may want to use the controls they generate to control blend shapes. We also may want to use the face bones as deformers at another time, or a combination of both. I'll unsolo the face bones, make them visible for now, go back to the object mode, and select the body mesh. I use Alt-P and the Clear Parent option to unparent the mesh and delete the armature modifier. Then I use my quick favorites to select Delete All Groups, which can also be found in the Vertex Groups down arrow menu as we've seen before. And the Vertex Groups and all evidence the skin has been applied is gone. I select the mesh, then add the armature to the selection and Control-P parent the mesh to the armature again. This time, even though the face bones are visible in part of the armature selection, there are no face bone vertex groups other than the jaw. You can disable any bones that you don't need to use to simplify your skinning and especially your weight painting if you use that tool. This is just one example. When the head turns now, the face is now attached to the spine 6 bone and jaw and rotates as expected. If I go to the weight painting mode, you can see the head and jaw vertex weights. I now have a fully auto-skinned character, but the deformations need some fine-tuning. At this point, I'm going to point out that in edit and weight paint modes, I always have X-Mirror turned on unless I specify otherwise. There are ways to recover if you don't do that, but they aren't always reliable. And now I'll show you a secret skinning trick that no one else has demonstrated in Blender or any other tutorial to the best of my knowledge. But first I'm going to use the annotation tool to show where the deformations I'll be discussing are at rest and various poses that I've set. The first area I'm going to focus on is the neck, shoulder, armpit, and latissimus dorsi area. Another thing I've added to quick favorites is display and activation of the 3D cursor. The cursor is set to adhere to mesh surfaces when I move it. By placing the cursor near the body where I'm creating an outline, the outline will move with that part of the body. I'm outlining the neck and shoulder first at rest position, as well as the shoulder, armpit, and hip area and crotch from multiple angles. In the arm at the side pose, I'll use blue to outline the shoulder and armpit. In the T pose, I'll use yellow. I'm outlining the flattened butt area so I can have an idea when I've improved that pose. I'll use red for the shoulders and arms up, leg out to the side pose. In the lower body area, I want to document where the silhouette and some crotch area details are. All of this annotation is to make the skinning changes clearer after I start altering skinning techniques and tune the skin more precisely. I'll turn off all but the red arms up, leg to the side annotation. I'm showing the annotation menu just this once so you can see how I turn the display of the various annotations on and off. I'm adding one more annotation. I'm using purple to visualize the estimate of a target goal for this pose. If you look at where I drew the arrow at the base of the neck, when the shoulder is rotated up, the neck collapses inward. That is not a desirable result. The goal is for the neck to be closer to its rest pose. Next on the T pose, I don't want the latissimus dorsi movement to be as pronounced. I want the curvature of the thigh muscle slightly more centered, and I want more of a curve on the butt cheek than the current flattened out curve. I also want the legs pulling less of the mesh from the opposite side of the body than it is now. There's a little too much stretching at the crotch. Going back to the shoulder, I feel that the shoulder flesh is unrealistically stretching too far toward the center of the collar area, and I'm drawing a minimum goal for that refinement. I'm getting a little sketchy with the annotation, but in this case, precision is not a requirement. Here's where I start going off the usual rigging script. This character doesn't have breasts, and those bones are not helpful in their present location. I'm going to move one end closer to the armpit and the other close to the back of the neck where it meets the shoulder. This will target vertices along that path to resist automatic bone assignment from the upper arm and shoulder bones. Now I'll go back to object mode, shift select the mesh to select it, and I'll return to the weight paint mode. I'll select all of the bones and assign automatic from bones again. This will recalculate the vertex weights. We don't have to delete the armature modifier and delete the vertex groups every time. I put the view back into orthographic front view so we can see how the mesh silhouette has been altered just by this one change. Just this one simple alteration has gotten this character closer to the skinning goals, especially at the back of the neck and shoulder. We can see that in the area in front, there is far too much shoulder movement. To make the next steps clearer, I'm going to turn off mesh visibility. I snap the cursor to the head of the left shoulder bone and add an empty at that location. I select the Object Properties tab and check the name and in-front options. There will be several of these empties, and we want them both easily identifiable and visible. I'll create a collection called pivots and move the empty into it, and rename the empty Shold HD _L _PIV. That's my naming convention. Now I'll make a duplicate and snap it to the tail of the bone. I like making a duplicate because it'll be set for the name and in front without having to change it. I rename that Shold TL _L _PIV. The tail location isn't as important as the head position because that's where the bone will pivot, but it's a good idea to mark where the bone started for this technique. I duplicate a third empty to mark where I plan to move the head of the bone. I'm renaming it Shold HD _L _skin. I erase the rough sketch purple annotation in that shoulder area and draw one that more precisely illustrates a goal for the inner shoulder mesh skinning. I'll go back to the first frame, and now I move the Shold HD L skin empty to a position that I estimate will move the vertex weighting of the shoulder bone away from the neck. It is still biased towards the front of the body. I select the armature and go into the edit mode, select the head of the bone and snap it to the empty. I select all of the bones and copy the check deform setting to all of the bones, just to make sure. The armature is already selected. I shift select the mesh and back to weight and paint mode. Once again, I select the bones and assign automatic from bones. I go back to object mode, select just the armature and go back to edit mode. I hide the mesh, snap the head of the left shoulder bone back to its original position, unhide the mesh, and return to object mode. The shoulder skinning is pretty close to the estimated goal. The neck is significantly improved as well, but not quite there yet. The latissimus dorsi area under the armpit is also significantly improved and meets the goal. But if we look at the shoulder from above, it now has a kind of weird shape that needs to be rounded a little better. What I'm going to try is to move the head of the left shoulder bone toward the back and into the body a little more. I'm going to do this by moving the Shold HD L skin empty back. I then move the head of the left shoulder bone to the new skinning position. I bring the mesh back. Back to object mode. I select add the mesh, go to weight paint, select all the bones, assign automatic to bones again, which will update the skinning. In object mode again, I select only the armature, go to edit mode, hide the mesh, select the head of the left shoulder bone and move it back to the Shold HD L pivot. I rotate the view around the character so we can see the changes. When I scrub the timeline, we can see by the silhouette of the neck that the neck movement is slightly more natural. There's less movement in front, more in back, but it still maintains the illusion that there's a trapezius muscle there. When I go to a front view now with the original outline of the neck and shoulder, there's a vast improvement in the positioning of the shoulder flesh. Looking at the T-pose, the latissimus dorsi is much less prominent, which was my goal. While I've significantly addressed the shoulder and armpit issues, we can see that there is still some shaping to be done at the back of the shoulder. I'll return to that using different tools and techniques later in this video. I'll address the pelvis area. I'm duplicating one of the empties to use for the bottom of the spine. This time I'm renaming it using the Object Properties tab, which doesn't require a precise double click. I'll turn off the mesh. Then I snap the spine piv empty to the head of the lowest spine bone. Duplicate it, move it towards the character's front, and rename it. I've relocated the lower spine for skinning. I'll bring the mesh back. The main issues that I want to start with is the left upper leg is affecting the center and right side of the crotch, as well as the upper right leg, and how the leg is caving in the upper left pelvis and lower abdomen. Armature edit mode returns us again to the rest pose. Now I'm going to relocate the pelvis helper bones to address these issues, as well as the flattened lower butt issue that I highlighted with the yellow annotation. I locate the heads of the pelvis bones near the center of the butt cheeks and inside the body. I locate the tails of the pelvis bones closer to the upper edges where the pelvis would be in a human, and slightly forward of the center line as seen from a side view. I tab back to object mode and we're back in our leg out pose. But we want the rest pose and shift left arrow back to frame 1. I select add the body. I go to weight paint mode where I plan to select vertices. Think better of that and tab to the edit mode where the selection tools work much better in this version of Blender. I ring select faces in the mid-abdomen, Alt-Z to go to X-ray mode, and lasso select all of the faces from the mid-abdomen to the feet. Then it's back to weight paint. I'm already in bone select, but I hit 3 on the top row of the keyboard and not the number pad to make sure. And I select all the bones as we've done a few times before using the A shortcut. But this time, once the bones are selected, I go to vertex select by hitting 2 on the keyboard upper row. Note how the select mode in the upper left changes from a bone icon to a vertex icon. And now we see our edit selection and weight paint and assign automatic from bones. Back to object mode. I select frame 15, which we all know so well by now, and there's something you should notice. All the work that we did on the shoulder is still there the way we left it, because only the selected vertices are affected in the skinning update. This is really useful information because now you know how to auto skin only an area that needs work. You can do this anywhere in the body. You can even do this if you add more helper bones for skinning. This means automatic skinning is no longer a one-time thing for you. You can move bones, add bones, do this sort of technique over and over again before you even begin to weight paint, if you have to weight paint, without screwing up the auto skinning refinement that you've already done. So now we'll look at the results. The crotch area seems to be better and the abdomen area on the side is better. But now the curvature where the upper leg meets the torso is pinched. I'm going to leave it because this extreme of leg position is rare. Unless you're really flexible, it hurts a lot to try it without rotating your pelvis. How did I do with the flattened bottom of the butt problem on frame 10? It looks like I achieved my goal of getting it rounder. Since this is a fairly low detail model, I'll add a subdivision modifier so we can get a better look at how the shape works out. Overall, the shaping is greatly improved. When a character kicks sideways, the animator would normally rotate the pelvis and bend the spine to accommodate that motion. Like the shoulder area, it could be improved more. It's entirely possible to spend hours just tuning the auto skinning this way. When dealing with the highest detail meshes, this could be the most efficient way to get the results needed. But this is an introduction of techniques. There are more tools to be discussed, as well as moving on to how these techniques are used on control rigs. And the next thing I'll discuss is use of the levels and smooth tools in weight paint. These are mouse-friendly tools that can largely be used as a substitute for weight painting. Back to the shoulder area. I created a vertex group to hide the character's head using a mask modifier. This helps with the shoulder visibility. The apparent shoulder muscle that isn't exactly a deltoid still goes too far to the center of the body at the front of the muscle. We want it to be rounder, as I've drawn with the blue line. We can zero in on this better skinning by continuing to adjust the shoulder bone for skinning, but instead we're going to use the levels and smooth tools in weight paint mode to shape this area of the body. Selecting the armature and mesh, as we've done before, I'll start in the edit mode for selecting by starting with the face ring select at the top of the visible neck, and expand the selection using Control Number Pad Plus. Weight paint mode. The first thing I want to do is remove all of the shoulder and upper arm influence on the neck and shoulder near the center of the body. In bone mode, I've selected the shoulder and upper arm bones. I go to weight paint and I'd normally use my quick favorites where I've added levels and smooth. But this time I'll show you where those menu items are in the weight paint menus. In the lower left, you can see that I have the option for vertex group levels open. In the subset pull down menu, I select selected pose bones. In the offset, I set it to -1. That sets all of the weight values for the selected bones to 0, and it looks nasty. But we're going to fix that. We need to select some faces, and I'll go to edit mode for that. I'll start by selecting the faces at the back of the shoulder that look like a cliff. Then I return to weight paint mode where I go into bone selection and select only the shoulder bone. Vertex select, and I select smooth from my quick favorites. Subset selected pose bones, factor 1, iteration 50 in this case. I get my view in the best position to see the shape of the rear shoulder, and I tune the expand contract control to expand the center of the new shoulder curve towards the neck. I do the same thing with the front of the shoulders until I invoke the smooth tool. This time, instead of selecting pose bones, I select all groups. This will smooth between the shoulder, the breastbone now being used as a back helper, spine 4, which is the neck, and spine 3, the upper torso. It smooths proportionally to the weight assignments of the adjacent vertices. I set the expand contract to 0 and does just a simple basic smooth that's already looking better. I get into a better viewing position for the top of the shoulder and further adjust the expand contract. There's a problem where the center of the shoulder muscle is being pinched at the neck. I go to frame 13 for better access to the vertices and just selecting them in weight paint vertex select mode. I use the Smooth tool, again with all groups selected. This immediately smooths the vertices using the previous settings, but I want the smoothing to be more subdued. I start by setting the tool back to iterations 1 and expand contract 0. I get into a better viewing position and notice one of the vertices is not reacting. The shoulder bone is not part of its weight set and is not giving us the smooth that is needed. So with the shoulder bone already selected, I add the left shoulder with a value of 0, and it jumps. I use the levels tool to add more weight from the shoulder bone and using the selected pose bones option, and adjust the offset to get the vertex where it looks best for this extreme pose. There's another back vertex that also needs a weight assignment to use the level tool, which also responds immediately to the 0 weight assignment. Again, I use the level tool to position that vertex where it looks best. Returning to the front view, when I scroll the timeline, it becomes obvious that I went from too much movement in the neck to too little at the bottom of the neck. I'm going to select vertices above the very base of the neck to blend in a slight amount of movement that won't interfere with the rotation of the head and neck. Using the levels tool with selected pose bones still used as the subset method, I'm going to scroll the offset ever so gently to add the slightest movement. Looking at the neck from the back, it's now clear that one vertex stands in the way of a smooth transition of movement from the front to the back. It's an adjustment that's so small that it's hard to move the 3.5% change by scrolling from 0.010 to minus 0.025 that gives us a smoother transition along the edge loop. Now there's a new issue. The apparent deltoid muscle is still a bit too jacked and looks a little too well defined for the character. To edit mode I go. I select faces on the upper part of the arm and shoulder and jump back into weight paint mode. I bring up our old friend the Smooth Vertex Weights tool. We're already in the all group subset with its iterations at 1, so that saves us a second or two. I just need to set the expand contract offset to 0 and I'm almost there already. I just go from 1 iteration to 2 and I'll say good enough. In reality, this part of the shoulder will be hidden under a short sleeve shirt. So why am I bothering to refine this at all? It's because the vertex weights on the body will be transferred to the clothing, which has a much less clean topology, overlapping meshes, and wrinkles. Let's take a look at the character with hair and eyeballs and wireframe turned off. Holden's extreme shoulder movement looks reasonable enough for now. Time to move on to the part everyone has been waiting for. It's Rigify time. I hide the hair, brows, and eyeballs again and make the armature visible again. Holden still has his vertex groups in the body's data properties, but before I delete those again, I need to detach Holden's skin from the armature. I go to the modifiers tab so you can see the armature modifier before I use unparent and select the clear parent option. Watch that armature modifier disappear. Jump to the body's data properties again, and in vertex groups I scroll down to delete all unlocked groups, because I locked the mask group and I want to keep that. So what? We're just going to erase all that work we just did? Yes, we are. The Metarig is simpler than Rigify rigs, and I'm demonstrating concepts. But now that I know what I want to do, it'll take next to no time to do it again with a real rig. With the armature selected, I go to the armature's data properties tab, close viewport display, and scroll down to the Rigify submenu, which is already open, as well as the Rigify advanced submenu. If you will only be using one character rig, naming your rig is optional. It'll just be called rig, but it's a good practice to enter a rig name, and that's what I'm doing. Time to generate a Rigify rig. I hit the generate button, and boom! Rig. With lots and lots of controls, and it even has the right name in the outliner. I'll have to move that eventually. We're in the Rig's Data Properties tag, and everything is closed, so I open the Bone Collections submenu. The face collections are hidden, just the way we want them to be, but I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and there we have the Def collection. These are the deformer bones of the Rigify rig. I'm clicking the star icon, which solos only the Def bones, and I use my Quick Favorites shortcut to use the Viewport Display in front shortcut to bring the Rigify armature in front of the mesh. Using the Rigify rig's Data Properties Viewport Display menu, I change the bone display from octahedral to stick to unclutter the bone display. The first thing I do is turn off the face bones as deformers that we are not using right now, as we did with the Metarig. Since the face bones are not in a separate collection this time, I'll just select and hide them in both the edit and pose modes. Edit mode. I make the pivots collection visible. I select the Def shoulder L bone, turn on X mirror, and move the head of the bone to the shoulder HDL skin position. Then I hide the mesh. I select the Def spine head and move that to the spine skin empty position. I bring back the mesh. I select the mesh and shift select the armature. The spine has a pose on it that brings the head of the bone back to the spine PIV position. So I open the Data Properties tab and select the rest position. The spine returns to the spine skin empty. Use Ctrl P to parent and select the With Automatic Weights option. I hide the mesh, the armature is already selected, and I go to edit mode. I select the head of the Def shoulder L bone and move it back to the shoulder HDL PIV position. I zoom into the spine and move the head of the spine bone back to the spine PIV position. I bring the mesh back, select the Data Properties tab, and unsolo the def bone collection. This rehides the def bone collection. Pose mode. The torso and FK arms and legs are visible in the rig collection and selected in the rig layers in the sidebar. I select the upper arm and thigh FK controls. A bunch of new options appear in the sidebar. I slide the IK-FK sliders for each of the selected controls all the way to the right so that their value is 1. I could also have just clicked on the value and entered 1. As with the Metarig, I set rest position keys on frame 1, 6, 11, and 16. I redo the same poses that I used on the Metarig for the arms and legs. I'll set the head and neck rotation keys. But there's a problem. Rotating the neck control also rotates the chest vertices. I hope this is corrected at some point by the time you watch this tutorial, but there's a crazy Rigify bug at this time, and I'm going to go through some investigative steps to show you that the problem is not a neck bone vertex group influencing the chest. I select the mesh and go into edit mode. I go to the modifier tab and turn on the edit mode and on cage options. Now the armature deformations are visible in the mesh edit mode. The neck bone is actually called def spine 004 and its parent in the chest area as def spine 003. I can display the vertex weight assignments in the viewport sidebar by selecting a single representative vertex in the body and neck area on the mesh. Focusing on the neck, I've drawn an arrow that shows the selected neck vertex has a def spine 004 vertex group. When I select a vertex in the chest area that is moving with the neck control rotation, you can see that there is no def spine 004 vertex group, so the movement of the chest vertices with the neck control isn't a vertex weighting problem. Fortunately, there's a simple fix for this. Before I start fixing the problem, I'll roughly outline some chest edges so we can see when the issue is gone. I go back to object mode, select the armature, solo the def skeleton, and go into the armature's edit mode. The problem is in the def hierarchy, where the neck bone, or def spine 004, is connected to the chest, or def spine 003. The neck is driving the spine bone, and it should not be doing that. In the edit mode, I select def spine 004, click the bone properties tab, open the relations options, and you can see the parent is def spine 003, and below that there's a connected checkbox. I uncheck the connected box. Now when I test the neck and neck tweak rotation, it only rotates the vertices that are weighted to the def spine 004 and 5 bones, not the chest. Problem fixed. Back to our regularly scheduled tutorial. I select the Holden Rigify rig with the def collection selected and select add the body mesh. In weight mode, I scroll the timeline to frame 13 where I can better position the shoulders for selecting faces and vertices. Then I remember that edit is better for selecting faces and vertices at this time and go to the edit mode. I turn on the mask modifier to hide the head again. I loop select the exposed top row of the neck and expand the selection like I did with the Metarig. Once I've made the selection that I want, I scroll back to frame 15 where I'll be working on the shoulder and neck vertex group tuning. Back to weight paint. Switching to bone select, I select the def shoulder L bone. With X mirror on, everything I do will be matched on the right side. I use the quick favorites to select the weights, levels, and the adjust last operation window in the lower left is already set to selected pose bone with an offset of -1. The selected vertices lose their def shoulder L vertex weights. I switch back to the edit mode to select the faces of the shoulder that I want to move. Then back to weight paint mode. I select the smooth tool, select the all group subset, set factor to 1, and start with iterations also set to 1. I look at what I'm getting from different angles, go to a view from above, and raise the iterations to further smooth vertices. I use expand contract to bias the smoothing for less shoulder in front and more in back. I want even less shoulder toward Holden's front, so I use weights levels to pull those vertices toward the side of the character's body. I go back and forth between smooth and levels to shape the shoulder near the neck with groups of vertices. Notice that there are times I go down to tuning individual vertices. I work my way down the arm, working to get an acceptable shape. Then I work in the back, which would be in the scapula area if we were using proper anatomical nomenclature. Focusing on the lower body, I remove the def upper L influence from the abdomen above the underwear line. The auto-skinning in this area was actually pretty good thanks to the legs in the A position and optimally positioned def pelvis bones and def spine skinning position. No flat bottom on the butt. I open the modifier tab on the subdivision modifier. I turn on viewport display with optimal display turned off. Decent curvature on the butt cheek without too much face stretching. The crotch also has minimal stretch. I review the skinning by scrolling the timeline in object mode. I'm satisfied with the skinning I've gotten for an introductory first pass to explain tools and concepts which may be unfamiliar. Up to now we've hidden the eyelashes, brows, side hair, and eyeballs. I'm allowing them to be displayed now. As you can see, they aren't attached to the rig. It's time to skin the overlapping geometry of the body parts so they will exactly follow the body skinning. First I select the brows, scalp, side hair, and eyelashes. I select add the rig and parent the meshes to the rig using the Armature deform option. No auto skinning. The eyeballs will be constrained, so I hide them for now. Next I select the body, select add the eyelashes, go to the weight paint mode, and select weights, transfer weights. Here are the apparently very secret options that are rigging magic. In the lower left tool options, there's a pull down field labeled vertex MA ... That's vertex mapping. Use the nearest face interpolated option. For source layer SEL ... or source layer select, choose by name. I select the body and brows, go to weight paint, and add the transfer weights menu to my quick favorites because I'm doing this multiple times. Same settings as last time. It will always be nearest face interpolated and by name. Those settings will be remembered by Blender and I don't need to change them every time. Next, side hair, then scalp. I test the skinning and the hair doesn't move. That's because the armature modifier operation comes after the particle system that I'm using for the hair. I move the particle system above the armature and fixed. In this case, I'm going to solo the ORG bones. I could also do this with the def bones, but I've hidden most of the face bones. The org bones for the eyes are accessible. I hide all the meshes but the eyeballs to make them and the org bones easier to access. I select the left eyeball and add a child of object constraint. I add the rig with the eyedropper tool. I have to manually add the bone from the rig, so I type eye and a list of eye bones and controls comes up. I choose org.eye.l. The eyeball jumps away, so I hit set inverse and it comes back. Then I select the right eyeball, add the child of constraint, add the rig, set the org.eye.r bone, the eyeball disappears, and I hit set inverse again. I unsolo the org collection, bring back the controls, and select face in the sidebar item tab rig layers menu. I go to pose mode, select the eye control, and move it around to make sure it works. It does work. Now the eyes follow the head. I scrub the timeline again to make sure the hair, brows, eyelashes, and eyes follow the head's movement. The body and parts look like they're ready for the next skinning trick. First, I unhide the clothing collection. I've merged the shirt, pants, belt loops, and shoes. It's time to attach the clothes to the rig. Holden's clothing is complex. It has overlapping geometry, separate meshes, asymmetry, and wrinkles. First, the wrong way. I select the clothing and select add the armature. Then I parent the clothing to the armature using the with automatic weights option. The only question is, how is this going to explode when we move the rig? And the clothing does not disappoint. The belt loops fly in all directions. The belt is being pulled up into and up the body. Not as bad as some transporter accidents I've seen. Still, I'm not going to waste my time trying to fix that with weight painting or the other tools I've shown. Instead, I'm going to burn it to the ground by deleting all the vertex groups on the clothes. If there are groups I intended to keep, I lock them and delete all unlocked groups instead. I scroll the timeline to show that the clothes aren't attached attached to the armature anymore. I turn the clothing's armature modifiers edit and on-cage visibility settings on so we can see the armature poses in the clothing's edit mode. I'm going to use the same techniques that I used to skin the eyelashes, brows, and hair. I select the body, select add the clothing, and go to weight paint mode. Weights, transfer weights, vertex mapping, nearest face interpolated option, source layer select, by name option, just like before. I scroll the timeline and just look at that beautiful skinning. The clothing parts all track the way they're supposed to. I turn the armature visibility off and deselect all so we can just see the mesh deformations. I move the view around Holden so we can better see how the deformations look. There's some interpenetration with the underlying body at the crotch. There's deformation issues at the crotch besides the interpenetration, and I'm going to fix them. Time for edit mode. The dark pants make seeing the wireframe a challenge, so I'm going to use solid shading without textures. I select the affected crotch faces, go to weight paint, and vertex select. Weight smooth tool, factor 1.0, subset all groups, and there's already a big improvement. I move the view so we can get a better look at the affected vertices and topology. I up the iterations from 1 to 2, and move around the affected area in the viewport. Good enough. I go back to material preview from solid shading. Object mode. I turn off the armature and move around the viewport so we can get an unobstructed view of the area. You know what these clothes need? A subdivision surface modifier. Oh yeah, that's an improvement. I bring the armature back, take it out of the Bone Collection's Def Solo, and bring back the control rig. I check the knee bends even though I've done nothing to tune that area of the body. The knees could use some tuning, but aren't terrible as they are. This is something that would be tuned in the underlying body before working on the clothing directly. It's something of an art decision to decide how pointy the knee should be. Checking the elbows, it's much the same. Looks okay, could use work to make them more elbow-shaped when they bend. The subdivision modifier makes the elbows look a bit rubbery. There's also the issue of flexing biceps, which can be done with added bones or blend shapes. But those solutions are a whole tutorial on their own. Now it's time to hide the body that's underneath the clothing. Object mode. I select the body and go to edit mode. In X-ray visibility, I select the faces that I want to hide. I hide the clothing collection and refine the selection. In the Object Data Properties tab, I add a vertex group, rename it Hide, and assign the selected vertices with a weight of 1. Modifier tab. Instead of adding another mask modifier, I change the vertex group to the hide group we just added and turn on the visibility. Holden turns into the phantom limb. I add some faces that I missed on the back of the arm into the hide vertex group, and they disappear. I bring the clothing back and look at Holden from different angles. Object mode. I select the armature, go to pose mode, and select the arm and leg FK controls. I slide all of the IK FK sliders to 0. I scroll through the timeline, and the FK controls are no longer affecting the def bones that everything is skinned to. I turn off all of the arm FK controls and make the IK controls visible. I turn on the leg IK controls, but because the screencast mouse and keyboard display is in the way of the FK switches, I adjust the scaling of the sidebar text so that the whole rig interface is in view, and I turn off the leg FK controls. A bunch of options turn off, and now there's room to make the sidebar text larger again. I select the upper arm IK controls, and I hit the toggle pole button. 2 spherical controls with lines leading to the elbows appear. I prefer these controls to rotating the upper arm IK controls. These are named upper arm IK target L and R. I line them up with the elbow joint. The elbows point at these targets, so I'll refer to them as elbow targets from this point. We'll get a 3/4 view up so you can see the spatial relationship of these elbow controls to the body. I apply the current visible controls as the rest pose. If I clear all transforms for those objects, they'll always return to this position. The hands are now independent of the shoulder movement, and we can see that the shape of the shoulders is pretty good when the character shrugs. As I do IK specific tests, the deformation is okay, but really could use additional refinement in a finished rig.